It was around 8 years ago when I first dipped my toes into the world of deliveries. I had just signed up for the job and was still figuring things out. Pattaya, the city that never seems to sleep, is a place where traffic jams, dust, and the blazing sun dominate the daytime. So, it was a no-brainer for me. I chose to drive at night. The cool night air was a welcome contrast to the suffocating daytime heat, and the empty roads made my job a breeze. But there was always a tinge of caution in the air. Other drivers told me about nighttime deliveries that were prone to mistakes, unresolved customers, and dark alleys that gave you the creeps. But I didn't believe in any of that. I wasn't afraid of the dark, and I didn't even believe in ghosts. I'd never seen one, and I never would. If there was anything to be afraid of, I figured, it wasn't the supernatural. One night, everything changed. I had just wrapped up a delivery, 27 baht for a quick drop-off. Nothing out of the ordinary. But as soon as I was done, a new job popped up on my screen. I blinked, thinking I'd read it wrong. 369 baht. That was the delivery fee. For one job. Now, to put that in perspective, most riders like me had to hustle for hours, sometimes half the day, racking up job after job just to make that kind of money. And here it was, just sitting there, waiting for me to grab it. I couldn't resist. The delivery service I worked for had two modes, food delivery and parcel delivery. I usually avoided parcel jobs. They were unpredictable, often not worth the trouble. But this fee? It was like the universe was daring me, tempting me to break my routine. 369 baht for one job. It was too good to pass up. I thought, finish this one and I'll call it a night. The destination? 42 kilometers away. A round trip would clock in at 80 kilometers, maybe more, depending on how well the directions held up. But honestly, all I could think about was the money. That 369 baht for a single delivery was too good to pass up, so I pushed any doubts aside and hit the road. When I arrived to pick up the package, the customer handed me a small envelope. It looked official, with the Garuda emblem emblazoned on the front. I didn't give it much thought, my job was just to deliver. But then, something strange happened. The customer walked up to my car, peering at the headlights. "Are your high beams still working?" he asked in a strange tone, which I couldn't quite pinpoint. "Yes, it still works." "Is there a problem?" I replied. "Oh, no. I was just worried. The road might be dark, that's all." I shrugged it off, telling him the high beams were always on at night. But he wasn't done. "You can go in the right direction, right?" I gave him a look and said, "You put the pin in the right place, didn't you?" "That's right, bro. Just head straight," he confirmed, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that made my skin prickle. I pushed it aside and drove on. As time passed, the distance felt farther than it should have been. I've never sent anything this far before, and I'm starting to wonder what might be on the other end. The envelope was sealed tightly in my pocket. The closer I got to my destination, the darker it seemed to be creeping up on me. It was around 10 p.m. when I came near the pin location. The road was straight and uneventful until the GPS told me to take a left turn. So I followed the signs. But instead found himself facing a military camp. I turned into the entrance, expecting the usual security check. Instead, I found a soldier, sitting unnervingly still in the guardhouse. He was like a statue, his face blank, staring straight ahead. I called out to him, trying to get his attention, but he didn't react. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. I honked my horn, and finally, he turned his head, but it wasn't natural. His head stayed still while his eyes rolled toward me in a way that made my blood run cold. I gestured forward, trying to ask if I could pass, but he just rolled his eyes back and continued staring into the void. I took it as a silent go-ahead and drove on. The road was smooth and well-lit for the first 100 meters. A cool breeze was blowing through, giving me a comfortable feeling. But then the streetlights started to dim one by one, until I drove into the darkness. I came to the end of the road, which was a dead end, with an old abandoned oil factory building on my left and a steep slope on my right. The GPS told me to drive up the road, so I followed, trusting that the GPS would lead me. As I drove up the steep hill, the road ahead seemed to close up. The darkness was becoming more and more claustrophobic. A sign appears. They said road construction was underway. Do not pass. But I figured there was a customer ahead. Maybe a construction worker or someone who lived nearby. The night was thick, a blanket of darkness that pressed down on everything around me. I could barely see anything, just the small circle of visibility cast by my headlights. The high beams stretched out about 10 meters, but even then, they only illuminated the ground directly in front of me. Behind me, the red glow of my taillights faded into the inky blackness after just a few meters. The sky above was a moonless void, leaving everything in a dim, shadowy blur. I had to rely on my car's headlights to navigate, trusting them to keep me on the road and away from any hidden dangers. The air was heavy with an eerie silence, broken only by the low hum of the engine. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it, a woman's laughter, distant and haunting. It sounded far away, like it was being carried on the wind from some place I couldn't see. I tried to push away my fear, telling myself that the darkness was playing tricks on my mind. I kept driving, about 200 meters, trying to calm myself down, but something was wrong. I pulled over, set up the kickstand, and pulled out my phone. I had to call my client and make sure I was in the right place. The phone rang, and the customer picked up. Hello. Did you pin the correct location? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, then he said only one word, Irritability rose in my heart. Hey, I'm here to deliver your package. Where should I go? Again, he answered vaguely, yes. Now I was starting to get angry. I'm here to work, not to play games. Can you show me the right way? But the call ended abruptly, leaving me with nothing but static and a rising sense of unease. I decided to switch to the chat in the app, hoping to get a clearer answer. I typed a message asking the customer to pin the location again or add me online to give more detailed directions. But when I hit send, nothing happened. The screen showed no signal, just a single red line with a cross through it. No internet, no phone signal, nothing. Panic began to creep in. How could I talk to my customers if there was no signal right now? I tried my best to stay calm and reached for the pack of cigarettes I had hidden in my car. I lit one, my hands shaking a little. Then the old thoughts came into my head. This is what the elders used to say about offering cigarettes to the spirits to clear the way. It seemed ridiculous, but at that moment, I was willing to try anything. I hung the cigarettes on a dry branch and prayed, hoping that it might help me see things more clearly. As I stared at the cigarette, I noticed that it was burning much faster than mine, almost abnormally. I told myself it was just wind, even though the air was still. I regained my composure, intending to keep driving, following the GPS. Fortunately, the GPS signal was still working, allowing me to keep driving. But then I heard another voice, a deep, dry cough, like an old man clearing his throat. My hands moved on their own, squeezing the brake and bringing the car to a stop. My mind raced, fear beginning to gnaw at the edges of my thoughts. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped out of the car, the beam cutting through the darkness as I walked forward. 20 meters ahead, the ground dropped away. It wasn't a sheer cliff, but a steep slope that led down into a thick forest. If I hadn't stopped, if I hadn't heard that cough, I would have driven right over the edge. The road below was dangerous, with holes and damage, and I knew that if I drove down, my body would be in bad shape. It was as if someone or something had warned me just in time. I sat on the street, sweat pouring down every pore, my skin was wet with fear, my legs were shaking underneath. After a few minutes, I regained my composure and stood up, but when I turned around, my heart almost stopped beating. A woman emerged from the shadows of the forest, but there was something horribly wrong with the way she moved. She didn't walk straight, no, she shuffled sideways, crab-like, her body unnervingly stiff. Even now, as I tell you this, my hands tremble, and my skin crawls with goosebumps. Her appearance was burned into my memory. The darkness around me should have hidden her, but I saw her clearly, too clearly. She looked like a construction worker, but something was off. Her hair was long, falling over her face, obscuring everything but her mouth. I couldn't see her eyes, but the way she moved made my blood run cold. Her hair was thick and tangled, her bangs long enough to reach her nose, leaving only a twisted smile visible. In that instant, my mind raced. Should I run? Should I stay? Should I call out to her? My mouth moved before my brain could decide, and words tumbled out in a shaky voice, "I'm lost, where should I go?" As if in response, the young woman stopped. She stood there like a statue, and then she smiled slowly. A wide, worrying smile revealed blackened teeth. Teeth that looked old, as if they belonged to someone who had chewed beetle leaves for years. She smiled slowly, her lips lifting to reveal those blackened teeth. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, she raised her left arm and extended it toward me, her hand stiff and jerky. She waved, but it wasn't a normal wave, it was frantic, unnatural, her arm moving so fast it blurred. Her head began to nod in time with her hand, both moving at an impossible speed, like she was beckoning me closer, urging me to follow her deeper into the dark. That was it. I lost it. I screamed, every curse word I knew spilling out of me as I backed away. I couldn't take it anymore. I stumbled back to my car, too terrified to think clearly. She was still behind me, about 20 or 30 meters away, but when I finally dared to look up again, she was gone. Just like that, vanished into thin air. I felt like I was going crazy. Panic took over me and I ran. I ran back the way I came as fast as I could, my heart was beating fast. I didn't care what was going to happen, I just had to get out of there. I ran for about 200 meters before I reached the intersection. Then I realized, I had forgotten the most important things, my motorcycle and my phone. I skidded to a stop with a small grumble, then turned around and ran back. But when I got to my destination, things got worse. The car wouldn't start. This afternoon, I forgot to turn off the ignition, which drained the battery, and now the car is off. Goosebumps ran down my face as I realized I was stuck there. I grabbed onto the handlebars of my motorcycle and took off with all my might. Using the slope as a helper, but even as I went down the slope, I felt strange, as if I was going too slowly, as if something was holding me back. Desperation gripped me. I had to go faster. I had to get away. As I glanced to the side, my heart dropped into my stomach. There she was, the woman from the forest, lurking behind the trees. She didn't walk out into the open, though. No, she peered at me from behind the trunks, her face appearing and disappearing as I passed each tree. She was following me, her head popping out from behind each tree in turn, her eyes locked onto me. My mind whirled and my instincts were on high alert as I caught sight of her. Then I heard a voice. It was an old man's voice. It was a hoarse and old voice, like the cracking of old bones. The sound was not very loud. But it can cut through the silence with clarity and eeriness. Go ahead, son. Don't look back. Just keep going. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filled with a strange benevolence that gave me goosebumps. I stepped forward and pushed the motorcycle down the uneven path. The slope that had helped me drift was gone, leaving me struggling against the weight of the motorcycle and the feeling of dread that gnaws at the nape of my neck. Finally, the entrance guardhouse came into view, or what was left of it. The bright lights I remembered had dimmed to a single flickering bulb, casting long, ominous shadows. My heart pounded as I approached, desperate to find some trace of the soldier I'd spoken to earlier. But when I reached the guardhouse, I found the door locked tight with a rusted padlock. I peered through the dusty window, expecting to see the man's post, but instead, I found nothing, just a dark, empty room filled with cobwebs and decay. My mind raced. How could this be? The room looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but I was sure I'd seen him there just hours ago. Panic started to set in as I considered the impossible. Was I on the wrong road? Or was something far more sinister at play? I stumbled back to the main road, which was eerily deserted. Not a single car in sight, and the only light came from the weak 3G signal on my phone, a far cry from the usual 4G or 5G I was used to. My hands shook as I dialed the customer, my voice barely steady as I tried to explain. "Listen, I'll leave this here," I said in a panicked tone. "You can go get it yourself." I saw something inexplicable. I barely waited for an answer before I dropped my phone. My heart was pounding. The customer said I was still 12 kilometers from the actual delivery point. 12 kilometers? How could I have gotten so far lost? The GPS must have been broken, there was no other explanation. But it still seemed too convenient, too easy. I made it home safely that night, but safe was a relative term. My mind was anything but. I was haunted by the events, unable to shake the feeling that I had crossed paths with something not of this world. I was sick for days, bedridden with a fever that refused to break, my thoughts consumed by that terrible night. Later, I spoke to friends who lived nearby, hoping to gain some insight into what had happened. They told me that the military camp where I had been delivering the items that night had been abandoned for over a decade, and had been the site of both political scandals and unsolved murders. The camp is a site of dark history that had been closed to the public for nearly 11 years. The road I was driving to was supposed to be sealed off and accessible only by military vehicles. Since that day, I don't dare accept delivery work at night again.